Okay, so I'm here to explain Saturn in the 10th house, and this really isn't no complicated, intricate placement, so this probably won't really be too long of a video. The 10th house is a house that's naturally ruled by Saturn in the sign Capricorn. The 10th house is the highest, the highest house in the birth chart. The 10th house represents authoritative figures, your dad, career, and that's about it for the 10th house. Saturn, it represents one of the two planets that represents the dad. Sun and Saturn represents the dad. Saturn represents karma. Saturn represents debts. Saturn represents boundaries and restrictions and likes putting order and structure to whatever house and to whatever sign that it goes into. And when Saturn goes into his own house, of course it feels comfortable. And what you see here is someone that is this is someone who is a very hard worker. And these people could potentially have a desire to want to make an impact on the world. Why? Because Saturn represents the skeletal system. It represents bones in our body. And the bones is the last thing to remain once we die. Everything else falls apart, but our skeleton remains. And Saturn can represent buildings, it represents structures. And the 10th house, it can represents the outside world, because opposite of it is the 4th house, which represents the home. And so the opposite of your home would be like outside, or your second home, which is the second place that you spend the most time at, which is your job. Most people spend the most time in their life probably either at home or at their job. So your second home is like the 10th house, which is your job. But back to my point that I was making before I get lost in the sauce. Saturn wants to make an impact on the world, and the 10th house can represent the impact that we make on other people, because it's like how we're viewed on the outside world. The first house is the personality that we the traits that are first represented and exuded when we first meet someone, when we first step out into the world. But the 10th house can represent the impact. It can sort of represent how people perceive us, or the impact that we make on other people. Like you're working at a job and your supervisor or co-workers, they just observe you and they give you some evaluation and be like, well, they this type of person. That can sort of be related to the 10th house. But these people, they could probably want to have a job or have some desire to make a long-lasting impact on the world through their profession, through their job, some way, somehow. Like I said, these people are naturally hard workers, because this is a house of like career and status, and Saturn is a hard-working, orderly planet. These people, they do not like fame, or they don't really care for fame. 10th house is one of the houses that can represent fame, because you're sort of known by your career and the impact that you made on the world. That's what sort of blows you up and make you famous. But in like the Indian caste system, Saturn is more so like a servant. Saturn is very subservient and like a humanitarian, or like a maid or whatever. It serves other people. Saturn doesn't really want to sit on a throne as a king, as a ruler, on some monarchy. They just want to. This is just someone who someone who just works long, hard hours at a job and doesn't really complain or fight to get a raise or be promoted. They're just content and fine and happy with just working as hard as they can, or just doing their little routine job. Someone with displacement Saturn in the 10th house, they have a strict, orderly father. Their father could be very hardworking. Their dad could just be very strict, and their dad or father-like figure could really instill lessons on them, like any parent would, but they could really try to instill lessons and values into them. But the way that they might go about instilling lessons and values into you might be very mean, cruel, and harsh. Someone with Saturn in the 10th house definitely has a father or a father-like figure who is definitely their parent and not their friend. They're here to prepare you and whip you into shape to deal with the harsh realities of the world, of the work environment. And they can just be cruel sometimes, but that they'll love you, and they have good intentions, but they'll just be cruel and be potentially harsh in preparing you for the real world, the reality of the world. And that is just about it for what happens when Saturn goes into the 10th house. Like I said, this wasn't really nothing intricate and deep for the most part. You're just someone who's a hard, dedicated worker who doesn't care for the spotlight, who doesn't care for the fame. You had maybe a strict, orderly, harsh, but loving father at the same time, a father-like figure. And you could potentially desire to make an impact on the world and on other people. And that's just about it for what I have to say for when Saturn goes into the 10th house. Thank you.